I discovered my wife turned our marriage into a weekly comedy roast. So I recorded every humiliation, served divorce papers live, and walked away free. Have you ever stepped into a comedy club where you're the punchline? Well, that was my Thursday evening 3 months ago. I came home early from work, expecting to find my wife preparing dinner like usual. Instead, I heard laughter coming from our dining room. Not just any laughter, but the kind that makes your stomach turn, because you know it's at someone else's expense. I quietly set my keys down and moved closer. Through the crack in the door, I could see my wife sitting at the head of our dining table, surrounded by her usual crew of friends. They were all holding wine glasses, and she was in the middle of what looked like a full performance. And then he comes out of the bathroom doing this weird little dance because his boxers are riding up, she said, mimicking some ridiculous movement that apparently represented me. The whole table erupted in laughter. I swear, it's like living with an overgrown teenager sometimes. I stood there frozen. She was talking about me, about us, about our private moments. One of her friends chimed in, "How do you even deal with it? I would lose my mind." "Oh, trust me, some days I wonder what I was thinking when I married him," my wife replied, taking another sip of wine. Like last week, he tried to be romantic and cooked dinner, burned the chicken, set off the smoke alarm twice, and somehow managed to splash marinara sauce on the ceiling. I'm still finding red spots up there. More laughter, more wine, more humiliation. "What about in bed?" another friend asked. I felt my jaw clench. My wife didn't hesitate. "Well, let's just say he thinks foreplay means asking, 'Are you ready?' and waiting exactly 3 seconds for an answer." The table exploded again. And don't even get me started on his weird obsession with checking the locks exactly 3 times before bed. Every single night. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding. This wasn't casual conversation between friends. This was a full-blown roast session, and I was the guest of honor who hadn't been invited. I made my way to the kitchen, trying to process what I'd just heard. These women weren't just gossiping. They were systematically tearing apart every aspect of who I was as a husband, as a man, as a person. And my wife was leading the charge. I grabbed a beer from the fridge and sat at the kitchen counter, listening to the continued laughter. 20 minutes later, chairs scraped, goodbyes were exchanged, and the front door opened and closed several times. My wife walked into the kitchen with empty wine glasses, humming cheerfully. "Hey, honey, you're home early," she said, not making eye contact as she loaded the dishwasher. "How was work?" I studied her face. The same woman who had just spent the last hour making me sound like the biggest joke in the neighborhood was now asking about my day with what sounded like genuine concern. "Fine," I replied, taking a long drink of my beer. "Sounds like you had company." "Oh yeah, just the girls. We were planning the charity fundraiser for next month." She still wasn't looking at me directly. "Nothing exciting. Charity fundraiser, right? I wondered if humiliating your husband now counted as charitable work." "That's nice," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Same group as usual?" "Mm-hmm." She finished loading the glasses and started wiping down the counter. "You know how it is. Once a month we get together to catch up. Once a month." I made a mental note. I finished my beer and stood up. "I'm going to take a shower. Dinner will be ready in about 30 minutes, she called after me. As I walked upstairs, I could hear her humming again. Happy, content, like she hadn't just spent the evening destroying everything I thought our marriage stood for. In the shower, I let the hot water run over me while I replayed every word I'd heard, the way she'd imitated my morning routine, the details about our intimate life, the casual way she'd questioned her decision to marry me. But what bothered me most wasn't just the content. It was how natural it seemed, how comfortable she was, how the other women encouraged it. This wasn't a one-off moment of frustration. This was entertainment. I was their entertainment. I got out, looked at myself in the mirror. Same face I'd seen every morning for the past 15 years. Same guy who worked hard, paid the bills, tried to be a decent husband, and realized I was now apparently a running joke in my own home. When I came downstairs for dinner, my wife had set the table for 2. Candles were lit. She'd even opened a bottle of wine. "This looks nice," I said, taking my seat. "I thought we could have a quiet evening together," she replied, serving the pasta. "We don't get enough of those anymore." I almost laughed at the irony. A quiet evening together after she'd just spent 2 hours broadcasting every embarrassing detail of our life to her friends. "How was your meeting with the girls?" I asked, cutting into my chicken. "Good, really good. We're making great progress on the fundraiser plans." She smiled across the table. I'm excited about it. I nodded and took a bite. The food was excellent, as always. My wife was one hell of a cook, among other things, apparently. Like being a great entertainer at my expense. That's wonderful, I said. What kind of fundraiser is it exactly? For just a split second, something flickered across her face. Uncertainty, like she was trying to remember which lie she'd told me. It's for the women's shelter downtown, she said finally. We're organizing a silent auction. Sounds like a worthy cause, I replied. I'm proud of you for getting involved. She smiled wider. Thanks, honey. That means a lot. We finished dinner making small talk about work, the weather, weekend plans. Normal conversation between a normal married couple. If you didn't know that one half of that couple had just heard himself turned into a punchline for the amusement of others. Later that night, as we got ready for bed, I found myself studying every detail of our routine. The way I checked the locks, folded my clothes, brushed my teeth, wondering which of these normal, mundane actions would become tomorrow's entertainment for her friends. You're quiet tonight, she said, sliding into bed beside me. Just thinking about work, I replied. She moved closer and put her arm around me. Well, try not to worry too much. You work hard enough as it is. I lay there in the dark, feeling her breathing against my shoulder, processing the complete disconnect between the woman holding me and the woman I'd heard earlier. One thing was becoming clear. I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. This wasn't just about one bad evening. This was about respect, and I was starting to realize I'd lost mine entirely. The next morning, I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront her yet. I wasn't going to create drama or start a fight. I was going to do what any smart man does when he suspects he's being played. Find out exactly how deep this rabbit hole went. Over the next few days, I became a detective in my own home. I paid attention to details I'd never noticed before. When she scheduled her charity meetings, how she prepared for them, what she did afterward. Most importantly, I started listening to how she talked about me when she thought I wasn't paying attention. It didn't take long to find more evidence. Tuesday evening, she was on the phone with one of her friends while I was in the garage. I could hear her through the thin wall. "Oh, you should have seen him this morning," she said, her voice carrying that same amused tone. He couldn't find his favorite coffee mug and spent 20 minutes looking for it. 20 minutes for a mug that was sitting right there on the counter where he left it. I looked down at the wrench in my hand and realized I was gripping it hard enough to leave marks. "I know, right?" she continued. "Sometimes I think he'd lose his head if it wasn't attached. But that's what makes Thursday nights so fun. We all need to vent somewhere, you know? Thursday nights, so it was weekly, not monthly." Another mental note. Friday morning, I decided to test something. I deliberately acted a bit scattered, left my keys in odd places, forgot where I put my wallet. Nothing too obvious, just enough to see if it would become material. My wife watched with amusement, offering to help while wearing that entertained expression I was starting to recognize. "Maybe you should make a checklist," she suggested with a sweet smile. "Keys, wallet, phone, brain." I laughed along, but inside, I was taking notes. That was definitely going into next week's show. That weekend, I had lunch with my brother. We were talking about work when he brought up something that made my blood run cold. "How are things with you and the wife?" he asked. "Good," I replied automatically. "Why do you ask?" He hesitated. "It's probably nothing, but I ran into her friend at the grocery store last week. You know, the tall one with the red hair?" I nodded. I knew exactly who. She made some comment about how patient your wife must be, dealing with all your quirks. Said something about how she couldn't handle living with someone who reorganizes the spice rack by color. I felt my face flush. I did organize the spice rack by color. It was efficient, and apparently hilarious. "What else did she say?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Nothing specific, just that your wife has some funny stories about married life." He studied my face. The way she said it, it was like she felt sorry for your wife or something. I finished lunch, but I could barely taste it. The humiliation wasn't contained to my dining room anymore. It was spreading. That night, I confronted her. Carefully. "My brother mentioned running into one of your friends at the store," I said while we watched TV. She looked up from her magazine. "Oh, which one?" "The redhead. Probably Jessica." She turned back to her magazine. "She shops there all the time. She mentioned something about our spice rack." For just a moment, her face froze. Then she laughed. "Oh, that? I might have mentioned how organized you are." She was complaining about not being able to find anything in her kitchen. What exactly did you tell her? Nothing bad, she said quickly. Just that you have your systems for everything. It was actually a compliment. I let it drop, but I saw the defensiveness in her posture. She knew she'd been caught. Sunday evening, I made my move. You know, I've been thinking about your Thursday night meetings, I said while we made dinner together. What about them? I was wondering if I could help with the fundraiser, maybe donate some items for the auction or help with setup. She stopped chopping vegetables and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. That's sweet of you. But it's really just the planning phase right now, she said. Mostly boring logistics. You'd be bored out of your mind. I don't mind boring, I pressed. I could at least meet the other organizers. Maybe take everyone out for dinner after one of your meetings. Now she looked genuinely panicked. No, that's not necessary. They're very focused when they're working. We don't really socialize much during the meetings. It's all business. All business. The business of making me a comedy routine. Well, maybe I could just say hello next Thursday when they're here, I suggested. I promise I won't interrupt. Actually, she said, not meeting my eyes, we're thinking of changing the location. Meeting at Jessica's house instead. Her dining room is bigger. I nodded slowly. That makes sense. But it didn't. Our dining room was plenty big enough for 6 women to plan a fundraiser. What it wasn't big enough for was 6 women to mock someone's husband while that husband was in the same house. She was moving the meetings because she knew I was getting suspicious. That night, lying in bed, I realized I was dealing with something more calculated than I'd thought. This wasn't casual gossip that got out of hand. My wife was actively protecting her ability to humiliate me, changing venues, telling lies, covering her tracks. She wanted to keep making me the butt of her jokes, and she was willing to deceive me to do it. The next morning, I called in sick to work. After my wife left, I did something I'd never done in 15 years of marriage. I went through her phone. I found the group chat immediately. It was called Thursday Wine Club. The messages made my stomach turn. Jessica, can't wait for this week's episode of Guess What He Did Now. Another friend. I'm still laughing about the lock-checking story from last time. My wife, I've got some good material this week. He reorganized the junk drawer according to some system only he understands. There were dozens of messages like this going back months. They weren't planning any fundraiser. They were planning weekly sessions to tear me apart. And they were all looking forward to it like it was their favorite TV show. But the message that hit hardest was from my wife, sent just 2 days ago. Moving the location to Jessica's place. He's getting nosy and I can't perform properly with him lurking around. Perform, that's what she called it. A performance. I took screenshots of everything, then put her phone back exactly where I found it. I sat in the kitchen in the same spot where I'd sat when I first discovered this, and I made a decision. My wife wanted a performance. She wanted entertainment. She wanted to turn our marriage into a weekly comedy show for her friends. Fine. Every good show needs a finale, and I was going to make sure this one had an ending nobody would forget. I had 3 days to plan the perfect closing act. 3 days to turn the tables completely. 3 days to show my wife and her audience exactly what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. The show was about to get a new headliner, and this time I was going to be the one getting the standing ovation. Thursday arrived, and I was ready. I'd spent the previous days preparing like it was a military operation. My wife left for Jessica's at 7 o'clock, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing the same excited expression she always had before her meetings. Don't wait up, she said, kissing my cheek. These planning sessions can run late. Have fun with your charity work, I replied. She didn't even flinch at the sarcasm. 30 minutes later, I was parked across the street from Jessica's house. I'd brought my laptop and a small recording device I'd bought from an electronics store. If I was going to expose this circus, I needed irrefutable evidence. Through the large front window, I could see them gathering in the living room. 6 women, wine glasses in hand, relaxed and ready for their weekly entertainment. My wife was already animated, gesturing as she spoke. I moved closer, staying in the shadows. The windows were slightly open because of the warm evening, and I could hear everything clearly. So last Sunday, my wife was saying, he decided to deep clean the garage. Spent 4 hours organizing screws by size and type. We're talking maybe 50 screws total. The laughter started immediately. But here's the best part, she continued, clearly enjoying her audience. He made labels. Tiny little labels for each container, Phillips head small, flathead medium. I walked out there and thought I'd married a hardware store clerk. How do you not laugh in his face? Jessica asked. Oh, trust me, I save it for you girls, my wife replied. But sometimes I have to leave the room, like yesterday. He asked if I thought our bathroom towels were properly color coordinated. More laughter. I pressed record. Speaking of the bathroom, another woman chimed in. Didn't you tell us he has some weird routine with the toiletries? My wife's eyes lit up. Right? He arranges everything in order of height. Shampoo, conditioner, body wash, all lined up like little soldiers. If I move something, he puts it back within hours. It's like living with someone who has obsessive-compulsive disorder, but only about the most random things. What about intimacy? Someone asked. My wife laughed and took a large sip of wine. He thinks romance means dimming the lights exactly halfway and asking if I'm comfortable every single time. Like he's following a checklist. Lights, check. Temperature, check. Mood music, check. The room erupted again. But the absolute worst is how he thinks he's being spontaneous when he plans everything 3 days in advance. He'll say, hey, want to be spontaneous this weekend? And then hand me a written itinerary, complete with time estimates and backup plans. The group continued for another hour. My driving habits, the way I fold fitted sheets, every story met with louder laughter. But the moment that made me stop recording came near the end. I have to ask, Jessica said, do you ever feel bad about this? I mean, he seems like a decent guy. My wife paused, swirling her wine thoughtfully. Look, he is a decent guy, she said finally. He works hard, he's faithful. He takes care of things around the house. But decent doesn't mean I can't find him ridiculous. Marriage is hard work, and if I can't laugh about the absurd parts with my friends, I'd go insane. But what if he found out? Another woman asked. My wife shrugged. He won't. And even if he did, what's he going to say? That I'm not allowed to talk to my friends about my life? That I have to pretend everything is perfect all the time? Some of this is pretty personal, Jessica said. Everything in marriage is personal, my wife replied. That's what makes it good material. I stopped recording and walked back to my car. I had everything I needed. Hours of audio of my wife systematically humiliating me for entertainment, and her admission that she knew exactly what she was doing and didn't care. The drive home gave me time to think. My wife wasn't just venting, she was performing, using our marriage as source material for her weekly comedy routine, and she felt completely justified. But what struck me most was her response when asked if I ever found out. She wasn't worried about hurting me, she was worried about losing her stage. That told me everything I needed to know about how she really viewed our relationship, and me. By the time I got home, my plan was crystal clear. My wife wanted to perform, she wanted to entertain, she wanted to turn our private life into public comedy. Perfect. Because next Thursday, I was going to give her and her audience a performance they'd never forget, one that would end with a standing ovation for me and complete silence from them. Friday morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. First stop, my lawyer's office. I need divorce papers prepared, I told him, sliding a flash drive with the recordings across his desk. And I need them ready by next Thursday. He raised an eyebrow. That's fast. Are you sure you don't want to try counseling first? Listen to about 10 minutes of that, I said, pointing to the drive. Then tell me if you think counseling would help. 45 minutes later, he looked up with a grim expression. This is pretty damaging stuff, he said. Public humiliation, breach of marital privacy, deliberate mockery. A judge would definitely consider this emotional abuse. I don't want to destroy her financially, I clarified. I just want out. And I want to be clear why. Understood. I'll have everything ready by Wednesday afternoon. Next, I called my brother and asked how long people had been talking about my marriage. At least 6 months, maybe longer. It had started as funny stories, but lately people were starting to feel sorry for me. That confirmed it. I'd become a community joke. Wednesday evening, I picked up the divorce papers, clean, professional, and airtight. I also had a compilation of the most damaging audio clips transcribed and ready. Thursday morning, my wife was practically bouncing with excitement. The girls are really looking forward to tonight, she said over breakfast. Jessica's making her famous spinach dip. Sounds fun, I said. What time does it start? 7:30. Should be done by 10 at the latest. Perfect, I replied. And I meant it. At 8:15, I drove to Jessica's house. This time I parked in the driveway. I walked up carrying a large gift bag and rang the doorbell. Jessica answered, looking confused. Hi, I said with my biggest smile. I hope you don't mind the interruption. I wanted to surprise my wife with something special. Oh, she stammered, clearly panicked. We're kind of in the middle of our book discussion. This will just take a minute, I said, stepping past her into the house. I promise not to interrupt your literary analysis. I could hear conversation stop dead in the living room. My wife's voice called out, "Honey, what are you doing here?" "Surprise," I announced, walking in with the gift bag held high. I brought dessert for everyone. The 6 women sat frozen, wine glasses halfway to their lips, staring at me like I was a ghost. "I know how much you ladies enjoy your book club," I continued, making eye contact with each of them. "So, I thought I'd contribute something sweet to your intellectual discussion." I reached into the bag and pulled out 6 manila envelopes. "What's this?" my wife asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Well," I said, settling into the empty chair at the head of the room, "since you've all been so interested in my marriage, I thought you might enjoy reading about it in a more official capacity." I handed each woman an envelope. "Go ahead, open them. Don't be shy." Jessica opened hers first. Her face went white. "These are divorce papers," she whispered. "That's right," I said cheerfully. "And not just any divorce papers. These cite emotional abuse, public humiliation, and breach of marital privacy, complete with full transcripts of your weekly entertainment sessions." My wife's envelope shook in her hands. "You recorded us?" "Just like you've been recording me, mentally anyway, for months. Every embarrassing detail of my life, every private moment, every personal habit turned into your weekly comedy routine." The room was dead silent except for the sound of pages turning. "The best part," I continued, "is that everything is completely legal. Public humiliation of your spouse, sharing intimate details without consent, deliberately mocking someone's personal characteristics for entertainment. Turns out that's grounds for divorce in this state." My wife finally looked up, tears in her eyes. "I can't believe you did this." "You can't believe I did this?" I stood, letting the anger I'd been controlling for weeks finally show. "You turned our marriage into a weekly sitcom for your friends, and you can't believe I'm ending it?" "It wasn't that serious," she said weakly. "We were just talking." "Just talking?" I pulled out my phone and played a clip. Her own voice filled the room. It's like living comp with someone who has obsessive-compulsive disorder, but only about the most random things. The women shifted uncomfortably. "Here's another," I said, playing the next clip. "He thinks he's being this smooth, romantic husband, which makes it even more entertaining." "Stop," my wife whispered. "Oh, but wait. Here's my personal favorite. I played the final recording. Marriage is hard work, and if I can't laugh about the absurd parts with my friends, I'd go insane. Everything in marriage is personal. That's what makes it good material." I put the phone away and looked around the room. "Ladies, you've been a wonderful audience. But the show is over. The marriage is over, and your entertainment is officially canceled." I walked toward the door, then turned back one last time. "Oh, and for the record, the man you've all been laughing at for months, he just served you divorce papers as dessert. I'd say that's pretty smooth after all." The silence was deafening. My wife broke it first. "You can't be serious about this," she said, voice shaking. "Over some harmless girl talk?" "Harmless?" I stepped back into the room. I played another clip. He thinks he's being the perfect husband, which makes it even more entertaining. It's like watching someone perform a one-man show about how to be married. "Does that sound harmless to you?" I asked. "Because it sounds like you've been treating our marriage like a comedy show for months." Jessica tried to speak. "Maybe we should leave you two alone." "No," I said firmly. "You're all part of this. You've all been participating in this weekly humiliation festival. You get to witness how it ends." One of the others tried to defend herself. "We never meant any harm. We were just being supportive friends." "Supportive?" I laughed without humor. When someone shares frustrations about their marriage, supportive friends offer advice or a listening ear. They don't turn it into a weekly comedy routine. My wife stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous. You're being completely unreasonable." "Am the first?" I played one more clip. "Everything in marriage is personal. That's what makes it good material." "Good material," I repeated. "That's what our marriage was to you. Material." The woman closest to me tried again. "Look, maybe we got carried away, but divorce seems extreme." "Extreme?" I turned to her. "What's extreme is spending months systematically destroying your husband's dignity for laughs. What's extreme is lying about charity work and book clubs so you can keep doing it. What's extreme is sharing intimate details of your marriage with people who don't care about your relationship." My wife's face crumpled. "I do love you." "No," I said quietly. You love the idea of being married. You love having someone to take care of the house, pay the bills, and provide comedy material. But you don't love me, because if you loved me, you would never have treated me like this. It wasn't supposed to be mean, she said through tears. We were just having fun. At my expense. For months. And when Jessica asked if you felt bad about it, what did you say? She looked away. You said I'd never find out, I continued. And even if I did, what was I going to do about it? You weren't worried about hurting me. You were worried about losing your stage. The room stayed silent except for my wife's crying. Here's what's going to happen, I said, addressing the group. You're all going to sign these documents as witnesses to the emotional abuse I've endured. The recordings are already with my lawyer, but your signatures will make everything cleaner. We're not signing anything, Jessica said. That's your choice, I replied. But the recordings are public record now. Every word you've said about me will be presented in court. Your signatures just confirm you were willing participants. One by one they signed, not because they wanted to, but because they knew they had no choice. My wife made one last attempt. What if I stop? What if we go to counseling? You had months to stop, I said. Every Thursday night you had a choice. You could have talked to me. You could have chosen respect. Instead, you chose entertainment. I can change, she insisted. Maybe you can, I agreed, but not with me, because I'll never trust you again. Every time you go out with friends, every private conversation, every smile at something I can't see, I'll wonder if I'm the joke again. I walked to the door one final time. The divorce is real, I said. My lawyer will be in touch. The house goes on the market next month. And ladies, I looked around the room one last time. Find some new material. This show is officially canceled. As I walked to my car, I could hear my wife sobbing behind me. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered how she'd laughed while imitating my voice, describing my attempts at romance, calling our marriage good material. I got in my car and drove away, leaving 15 years of marriage and a room full of women who finally understood what happens when you mistake patience for weakness. The performance was over, the audience was silent, and for the first time in months, I was the one who got the standing ovation. The divorce was finalized 2 months later, clean, simple, and exactly as humiliating for her as she'd made our marriage for me. The recordings became part of the public record, which meant anyone could access them. Word spread quickly. 6 months after that, I ran into Jessica at the grocery store. She looked uncomfortable but managed a weak smile. "How are you doing?" she asked. "Great," I replied honestly. "Really great." "That's good," she said, fidgeting with her shopping list. "Look, I want you to know we all feel terrible about what happened." "Do you?" I asked. "Or do you just feel terrible that you got caught?" She didn't have an answer. As I drove home that day, I thought about the man I used to be. The one who checked locks 3 times, organized spices by color, and planned spontaneous trips 3 days in advance. The man who tried so hard to be perfect that he became a punchline. I was still that man in many ways. I still had my routines, my systems, my particular way of doing things. But now I knew the difference between someone finding my quirks endearing and someone finding them entertaining. The difference was respect, and I'd learned the hard way that you can't build a marriage without it. My wife got her Thursday night entertainment for 6 months. I got something better. I got my dignity back. And unlike her comedy routine, that performance had a happy ending. Our story has come to an end. If you've made it this far, thank you. How about subscribing to the channel? It helps us more than you know. I've selected 2 other videos I'm sure you'll enjoy. Feel free to click on them. I'll be waiting for you in the next story. See you soon.